Thank you again to GIZ for inviting me. A very good afternoon to everybody who's present physically in the hall and others on the call as well. We had a lot of people talking about storage. My topic is to talk about potential for PV rooftop with battery storage, but I'll focus more on the rooftop side and then also talk very briefly about storage in the end. Just a very quick introduction in case you haven't come across us. We are a specialized clean energy focused consulting and research company. We are based in Delhi. We have been operational now for more than 10 years, so very much from the early days of renewable energy industry in India. And as you can see, we work with all the stakeholders, starting from equipment suppliers to project developers and investors, as well as international think tanks, agencies, and institutions. Most of the work we tend to do, it revolves around the business strategy, markets, policy, and financing side. We also have a very substantial research business. Please do look up our website, www.bridge2india.com, where you will find tons of information, some free and some not so free, on the renewable energy sector in India. Just very quickly, India RE Navigator is a 24/7 online portal, very comprehensive. So please, again, do try it and let us know if you're interested in access to this kind of data. So coming on to the rooftop solar market, very exciting market, huge growth potential in my view. As you can see in the slide, the market was growing at something like 50 to 60% per annum until about early 2019. And since then, the growth has slightly faded away and we are kind of hovering around the 1,500 megawatt capacity addition every year mark. What is the reason for the slowdown? There is no doubt that we are still, rooftop solar is still has a very low penetration in India. It accounts for only about 16% of total solar capacity. In the grid, if you see on the power injected basis, it accounts for less than 1% of total India's power needs. So why is it that the sector is kind of not growing as fast as many expected it to? Well, there have been many reasons in the last 2-3 years slowing down the market. There have been increases in GST. There has been safeguard duty. There have been some policy level changes by the states in particular, which I will talk about in the next few slides. But the fact is that the market, despite the huge potential, is kind of stuck at the 1.5 gigawatt per annum mark. The interesting thing really, if you look at the last 2 years, what has happened is that the residential segment, which used to be very small part of the total market, actually grew very significantly last year, notwithstanding COVID. So while the CNI segment actually shrank because of COVID, the residential market increased by something like 3 to 4 times. And that was mainly because of the new MNRE scheme, which is targeting 30 to 40% subsidies for residential market. Many states have issued their own empanelment tenders, because of which this market, in our view, is looking very exciting now and should grow step in step with the CNI market as well. Now, I think the key thing to understand, notwithstanding the bright potential and the consumer's keenness to self-generate, is that rooftop solar is not an aspirational or a necessity. The reason I say that is because most consumers now do have reliable access to power, or reasonably reliable access to grid power. And really, the biggest driver for rooftop solar or rooftop solar and storage is indeed what is the financial viability of these solutions. If a consumer is paying tariff of 6 rupees and more, rooftop solar makes sense. If you're paying a tariff of 9 to 10 rupees or more, rooftop solar plus storage might make sense. So very clearly, as you can see, now this data is basically average of grid tariffs for 15 states. It is slightly old, but the grid tariffs have not changed that much in the last 2 years. So if you see commercial and industrial consumers pay the highest grid tariffs. For them, rooftop solar is a no-brainer. Payback period is in the range of 3 to 4 years, and that is the segment which is kind of racing ahead installation of these systems, subject to some financing and affordability constraints. Domestic market, while the average tariff is about 4.5 to 5 rupees, the good thing is that many of the urban consumers, anybody with a consumption of more than 300 units per month, is actually paying a much higher tariff. I think most of us living in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, etc., are paying grid tariffs of somewhere around 7 to 10 rupees per unit. And for most of such consumers, rooftop solar is also a very attractive proposition, provided, of course, you have an available and rooftop space suitable for installation of a system like this. Obviously, we are showing here that the rooftop solar power cost, effective cost, is anywhere between 3.5 rupees to 5 rupees per unit, which means that you can make substantial savings over the grid power cost. No, I think the most exciting part of the market is the residential market because it's been ignored for very long. It's vastly untapped. We have just issued a report, a very comprehensive report on this market. And we believe that a lot of the various challenges holding this market back in terms of consumer knowledge, financing, affordability, government policy support, they are all beginning to fall away. And the result of that, in our view, is that this market is poised to take off. We believe this market could add anything between 15 to 25 gigawatts of capacity over the next 10 years, which I think, even if the subsidies are removed in the next 2 years. So I think that is that's a fantastic growth opportunity for the solar sector, as well as obviously for the consumers to reduce their carbon emissions. Just moving on, I quickly move past this slide, but the fact is that there's a very mature and thriving ecosystem in this sector now. A lot of startups have scaled up, gained huge amount of technical expertise in the rooftop solar domain. And now the market is very fragmented, but still there are a lot of very, very capable players across the value chain. I would say somewhat less so in storage, but which is not surprising given where storage market is at, still in very nascent stages. But we have heard a lot of C&I consumers, and I think it may be a good message for Rashi, that a lot of C&I consumers complaining that they can't actually find the right vendors and the right technology providers to give them the ideal solution meeting their needs. So I think the ecosystem is still very in the early stages of developing for the storage behind the meter storage market. I talked about increasing costs over the last 2 years. Unfortunately, that trend is likely to continue at least over the next 1 year. Module prices have peaked in the last 3 to 4 months. And even if they start coming down next year, at some time BCD is going to kick in. The result is that there is expected to be, unfortunately, a reasonable hike in capital cost for rooftop solar systems, and that is some kind of a short-term dampening factor for this market. Policy landscape is something which is very fundamental to how the sector behaves. Unsurprisingly, the free net metering connectivity provisions are being withdrawn by different states because this market is mature. The cost of power is very competitive and attractive for consumers. So states are now beginning to remove net metering and or starting to levy grid charges on rooftop solar systems. I think that is fine in principle. I think what is not so fine with this concept is that the levy of these charges is being done in a slightly ad hoc manner, and also slightly prematurely in our view, because all said and done, the market is still, as I said, in terms of power penetration, less than 1%. So it would be good if these charges were not to be imposed immediately, but rather over a period of time, as indeed has been decided by the Maharashtra regulator. And they have said that grid charges should not be imposed until the total rooftop solar capacity in the state crosses 2,000 megawatts. The good thing is that the discoms are beginning to realize that power has a price, but that price is highly dependent on time of the day. So the banking policies are changing accordingly. Some states, as shown in the slide, Haryana and Tamil Nadu are beginning to offer some incentives for rooftop solar systems aligned with storage systems. And I think this is the inevitable direction for this market. The incentives for storage systems are likely to grow stronger. The banking provisions are likely to be withdrawn. And all of this means that we will see a growing market for rooftop solar plus storage in the next few years. I can just skip over this slide quickly, but the point really is that it is only a very small part of the market. The top tier consumers, financially well-rated consumers who are still able to tap into rooftop solar, and a large part of the market, whether it is SMEs, smaller consumers, residential consumers, as well as the not so well-rated consumers, they still find some financing challenges. So there the market is in a little bit of flux. We do see some very interesting new business model, developments in the market. A lot of contractors and the whole ecosystem trying things like the subscription model, the leasing model, performance-linked capex model, etc., etc. And I think all that augurs very well for the growth of this market. Coming to batteries, I think Devi made some very bold and big projections for the market. We speak to most of the leading developers, contractors, and even some consumers from time to time. Our understanding is that at least when it comes to the advanced lithium-ion and other batteries, the business case is still not there, and I think that is somewhat confirmed by Rashi, when they were trying to explore a hybrid of different technologies. Certainly, if you're trying to replace DG consumption, then obviously it makes a lot of sense. Payback periods can be very, very short, but it really only if you know that if you are very substantially dependent on DG power. But if your backup requirement is only, let's say, half an hour or 1 hour and slightly erratic, then even then the business case for storage may not be there in pure financial terms just yet. Having said that, I think we are moving in the right direction. There are various applications for storage which are opening up, particularly I would say withdrawal of net metering, which means consumers may look now to build, if they want to build a larger solar system, it will be viable for them to actually install storage so they can actually shift their power output from afternoon to peak evening hours. There's a peak load shaving opportunity, the power factor correction opportunity, ancillary services, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of new opportunities, none of which on their standalone basis make the viability of storage systems, but I think together they can add up to providing a very good financial and business case over a period of time. What is the 2030 potential? I think we estimate somewhere between, for advanced battery chemical technologies, we estimated somewhere around 10 to 20 gigawatt hour for behind the meter systems. It can be much more. I think it depends on the evolution in the government policy and the regulatory framework. So I think coming to the end of my presentation, I think this is a distributed renewables is an opportunity which needs to be nurtured by the government as well as the private sector. What we need foremost above everything else is policy stability and visibility. We also need more help whether by way of financing or consumer education or warranty support mechanisms, standard instrument and system designs for the smaller consumers, because smaller consumers don't actually are not being catered to even today very well in our view. As I said, calibrated approach to grid charges. I think grid charges, levy of grid charges is inevitable, but let's not try to impose those too early and kill the market in the growth stages. Something graded over a period of time would be much better. And finally, what we actually do believe in, I mean, although incentives and subsidies is many times not the right word, not the right kind of policy mechanism, but the fact is that we did have policy incentives and subsidies for rooftop solar for a long time. Even today, we have those for residential solar. We have had incentives, financial incentives, a number of these incentives, whether it was accelerated depreciation, capital subsidies, viability gap funding for utility scale solar, for wind, for biomass and other technologies. And I think we would like to see some of that, at least for on-site storage systems, to at least trigger market growth and scaling up the market and building the ecosystem. And I think once that happens, then the network effect, the learning, the viability will evolve over a period of time. So with that, I am happy to end my presentation. Happy to take any questions and answers, and look forward to engaging with other speakers. Thank you. Thank you, Tobias.